On the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. We are the official podcast of the Lot 1 tailgate party, which is at Lambeau Field every home game. This is episode 97, created January 2nd, 2025. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me, Jeff in Minnesota and Neil on the East Coast. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
Good evening, gentlemen. Tonight I'm having a Crown Royal Black Cherry Whiskey Sour, and that's the taste that's left in my mouth after that Vikings game.
I'm drinking a beer from Fiddlesticks Brewing Company that tells me what the Packers are doing in the NFC North as the second fiddle, WIPA.
You guys put too much thought into this and are just cruel. I am simply having a Bloody Mary. All right, you can find us on YouTube and Twitter at Green Bay Chat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast, Green Bay Chat. Just the audio is available on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify by searching for Green Bay Chat. What are we looking at this week? It is that Week 17 matchup in Minnesota that they are pining about. We're going to talk about some Pro Bowl selections this week as well as get ready for, yes, it's Bears Week, Week 18, the regular season finale. We are at home. That means we've got tailgating in Green Bay. And we'll talk about our friend Scott and the Packers Fan Hall of Fame in a little bit. But first, let's head back to the Twin Cities. Neil, US Bank Stadium. The Packers lose 27-25. In 2 words, what do you have to say about that game?
Fuck off.
I was expecting Fiddlesticks to go with you here. Fiddlesticks, Neil.
That's just the kinder version of what I said, to be fair.
I agree with Neil, by the way.
All right.
The question really is which team? Like, we were celebrating that incredible victory on Monday night over the Saints, and we go directly to this Vikings game that just was terrible for so much of the game, but we started out really well in that game, right? Josh Jacobs and Dontavian Wicks love. We moved all the way down the field until we got the Josh Jacobs fumble on that first drive. So I have a question for you, gentlemen. If Josh Jacobs does not fumble that ball, do we end up winning that game?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you end up you end up in the end zone, I'm sure, or at least get some other points on the board. But yeah, what a soul crusher and momentum changer just in that moment. Like, even if it's in the first drive, it's one of those things where it's like you knew that this was going to be a back and forth possession game, probably a last team to have the ball wins kind of thing. And that just, things are going so well, and it just changes your total strategy, total perspective. And I think I really felt it in their second series. You know how the Packers tend to have their script going? It threw the script off completely.
They've been starting fast these last number of games, and that's been their MO. And it's worked really, really effectively. But you're right. It like took their mojo. It was so unexpected because he's not a fumbler. And it was just sort of so out of character. But then they just, I don't know, gave up is definitely not the right word, but it just discombobulated them. Something where it took all the life out of the offense, not the defense, but certainly the offense. And that was, I guess, disconcerting because that was the only turnover of the game. So to Neil's point, they probably would have gone down and scored. I mean, they like all the other first drives of the last month or so. But that just didn't happen.
I'm going to go back to this momentum and mojo thing. 3 of our next 5 drives after that were 3 and outs. And one of them is where we failed on the 4th and 2. And the other is where we decided, well, we're going to kick a field goal from 23 yards out. I mean, there was no sense that the players thought that they were going to do it. And it took a while before they got that belief back. And obviously they got their belief back too late when they started performing. But I just can't help but think that if they had gone down and scored a touchdown in that first drive, that would have changed the entire mindset of the entire rest of the game for that offense. And it would have helped the defense enormously too.
Well, it would have helped the score. I think most importantly.
Yes. The most important statistic of the game, yes. And like you said, Neil, on that 4th and 2, again, an opportunity where because things weren't going well, why not get the points on the board at that point as well? Once kind of things got discombobulated, if you will. And it's just kind of that unfortunate play along with that decision. That whole first half was just one of those things where it's like, we can't get to the locker room fast enough to get this figured out.
But that's what was so surprising is that how just this massive shift, because I mean, it was loud, it always is, but there was a fair amount of Packer fans in US Bank Stadium. And so, yeah, yes, it's a road game, but it's only 300 miles away. It was so uncharacteristic. And I don't know if it was a coaching issue, a preparedness issue, because like I said, they came out strong. So, and you're right, Neil, the next drives, although not awful, but they were unproductive, I think is probably the best way to put it. So obviously you get the fumble, but the Vikings don't do anything with their first possession then either. So, again,
so imagine the Packers score and then hold the Vikings on their first drive, and we get the ball back with a chance to go 2 scores up in the first quarter.
Right. It would be shades of last year in Minnesota on New Year's Eve.
Exactly. Which was dominant.
Right.
And it's one of those things where the Vikings then just hung in there. And like I said, the offense just couldn't get out of its own way. Again, we were afflicted with the dropsies again. Like all these like early season things came back in week 17. That was concerning, but I was watching this with a sense of, I don't know, not resignation exactly, but I wasn't upset watching this. I was like, what the hell is going on? Just kind of casual frustration than real anger or upset, because it was like, all right, are they going to work through this? Or are they actually going to pull their head out of their ass and do something? And, well, it took a really long time to do that, unfortunately.
But I think one of the issues that they had with momentum is something that we have talked about on numerous occasions this year, that they seem to be just going to 1 or 2 wells consistently. They just chose what well they're going to go to on a given drive, and they stayed in that well. That first drive was all Jacobs and Wicks for all the touches. Next, it was all long passes. Next, it was mostly Jacobs until they finally decided to throw to Kraft just for a change of pace to get something different. Drive after that is mostly Jacobs as well. Jacobs' numbers in the first half are actually really good. 13 rushes for 61 yards, but you contrast that with Love, 7 of 12 for 45 yards in the first half for Jordan Love. That is not play calling. That is giving your offense the best chance to win this game.
It was very curious because you're right, Neil. It was this streaky. There was no rhythm. So the longest sustained drive by time of possession was the 4th drive that was a total of 4 minutes and 23 seconds. That was the turnover on downs. That was the longest drive. A lot of this season, Green Bay's calling card is these long, sustained drives. Like you said, I don't know, play calling, it was or bad execution or something where we weren't getting those long, sustained drives either.
But I think variety is certainly a component of that. And you go back to what we liked about what the Packers did against New Orleans, where we had, 8 or 9 different players who touched the ball in the running game. In the first half, Jordan Love was the only person who had a running play other than Josh Jacobs. In the second half, Wilson had 6 touches and Jacobs had 4. Nothing to wide receivers in the game for the Packers offense, in stark contrast to what happened in New Orleans.
Yeah, there's no Jeff Sweep in this game at all. And it kind of harkens to, now, what do I keep saying? Did they go intentionally play a vanilla game? Did they not want to show what they wanted to show? But this was a game they had to win. So that's why I don't get it. Why would you go out that way if that's your long-term plan? So I don't know. I don't like that one. But this was a game they had to win. They had to win to have a chance at that number 5 seed. And now they're in the 7 spot fighting to get just up to number 6.
In addition to the schizophrenic offense, the defense, I think, was sort of the same. Now, in the first half, in week 4, when they played the Vikings, they were down 28-0 at half. The defense just was non-existent. This one, the defense, they gave up a lot of yards, but not a lot of points. So 13-3 at halftime was not this massive, insurmountable.
No, and the way that
much.
Green Bay, yeah, right. In the way that Green Bay has been making adjustments at halftime,
yes.
There was a lot of hope coming out of it. It's like I didn't feel down 10. I was like, oh, that's no big deal with this team. But then Minnesota comes out and drops another 14 points on us before things even get moving.
Yeah, that was
hard to swallow.
I mean, the resignation that you talked about in the first half, right? I mean, the Vikings had 179 passing yards in the first half of this game. That's an enormous number of yards, especially when we only have 45. And it just seemed that whenever they wanted to, they were able to take it a next step after that first drive, where we thankfully did stop them on that first drive. Essentially, it was the upright and their field goal kickers, their asshats being 1 of 3, should have been 0 of 3, was a savior as far as keeping this game closer than it otherwise might have been.
Yeah, because they only punted twice. I mean, most of their drives they scored on or missed the field goal, like I said. But yeah, that's the other thing. They were moving. I mean, they ended up with 441 total yards. And, they had 226 at halftime. So they didn't really slack off in the second half either. We had 112 yards and a half with our offense. And in week 4, they put up almost quadruple that in the game. In the first game, the Packers had 465 yards of offense.
There was a lot of points scored in that game too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there were a lot of turnovers in that game. In this game, there was 1 apiece. And fortunately, we were able to capitalize on the interception. That was fortuitous. And that was sort of like when that happened, it was like, even though we were down 20-3, it was like, okay, it's a super short field, score the touchdown. It only took 4 plays and suddenly it's 20-10. It's like, okay, well, here we go. And we're going to get back on track.
And then the defense said, nah, we're not going to do that.
Exactly. So it was, again, the schizophrenic. So when the offense played better, the defense went to sleep. And when the defense played well, the offense went to sleep.
I think it's fair to say that our defense had a poor game overall. They had a couple of drives where things worked out fine. But the fact of the matter is, we gave the first half numbers. In the third quarter, the Vikings had 144 yards of offense. And in the Vikings' bad quarter, the fourth quarter, they still had 73 yards of offense. Sam Darnold in the first half, 17 of 22. Third quarter, Sam Darnold was 12 of 14 for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had that interception as well, but 12, 14, 128 for Darnold in the third quarter. Fourth quarter, again, only 4 of 7 for 65 yards, but it was all Sam Darnold in the end. In the second half, you figure they've got a lead. They're going to kill the clock. They only had 24 rushing yards in the entire second half. They could just keep throwing the ball because Sam Darnold was getting enough time to pick out whoever happened to be open and nailing those people who were open. And that was the Achilles heel, essentially, is we couldn't cover everyone as long as we needed to. We couldn't get the pressure on, and therefore Sam Darnold was eventually going to find the right guy who was open.
Exactly. We had 1 sack for 5 yards. The Vikings offensive line had given up a lot of sacks. It was such a game of inches. We were close. I mean, there was some pressure, but there wasn't enough to rattle Darnold. And he's standing back there. He didn't scramble. I mean, there was no threat to run. He just sort of shifted around a little bit and found whomever was wide open, running down the middle of the field. Oftentimes, that's the part where blitzing didn't seem to work. Fritz Shermer, send more guys kind of thing. Just try and rattle this guy. Because when you get pressure against Sam Darnold, he does throw up bad balls and opportunities for interceptions. But man, 1 sack for 5 yards on 43 dropbacks. I mean, come on. What is going on with our defensive line? Where'd they go?
The key is that our defensive front really was not putting pressures on other than Brenton Cox, who had 4 pressures. Mosby had 2, Rashawn Gary had 2, Lucas Van Ness and Kingsley Enagbari had 0 pressures. And they certainly played plenty of snaps that they should have been able to get pressure on. They weren't getting the pressure on. And well, guess what? If you're relying on Brenton Cox as your number 1 person producing the pass rush, you're just very limited. I mean, that's one of the things that the Vikings were able to do in the fourth quarter, especially against Jordan Love, is they were, first of all, they were sending 5 people quite a bit, but you never knew where the pressure was going to come that was going to knock Jordan Love out.
I think that's what you just mentioned there is one of the things that I noticed being the big difference in what our defensive line does. Carl Brooks gets our only sack in this game. My knock against this defensive line is something I've said earlier this year. The strategy of just running straight at the offensive lineman does not work. There are no stunts. There are no wraparounds. There's no circles. There's no switches. It's so plain. It's terrible that it's like, okay, if you maybe, you put enough pressure, maybe you get a guy who gets the open spot, but it doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen the way it should. And when you watch the way Minnesota was operating against Green Bay, yes, these stunts, all of a sudden there's a guy coming up the middle that they switched in the back, off the snap. It's very disheartening to see that there's no flair in that defensive line to get to the quarterback.
There's no adjustment. I mean, against some offensive lines, that straight up rush has worked. I mean, we've had games where we've had 6-7 sacks. So that's clearly effective. You're right, John. Why are there not adjustments?
So did you guys see the analysis on whether there's a guy who did analysis basically on all of the Packers pass rushes where they did actually conduct a stunt. And his analysis was that the Vikings had figured out that the Packers were tipping their hand, essentially that they had a tell as far as who was going to be going back into coverage, who was going to be moving forward, because they essentially never adjusted to some of the pre-snap movement the Packers did, as if they knew what the Packers defensive front was going to do when they did actually try to stunt the ball. And I thought that was very interesting. It did not seem like a conspiracy theory analysis. It seemed like a very reasonable analysis. They had picked something up that our defense is doing that allowed them to essentially know how we were coming at them.
No conspiracy theory, but certainly problematic for the defense to get any pressure. Like I said, Sam Darnold is going to stand back there. He's been good this year, clearly. He's found his mojo, certainly. And that's just, like I said, they abandoned their running game. You're right. You think, oh, they're going to keep handing it off and, the ground game. No, that was non-existent. I mean, look at the last play that the Vikings ran, that half-ass kind of pass, shoestring catch. That was the game. If he drops the ball, if he's just not, when Akers caught that thing, we would have got the ball back and maybe scored. I mean, certainly we were,
Yeah. Woulda, coulda, shoulda, right, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's one of those things we have had a knock against this team since the preseason against the Minnesota Vikings, and they deserve a little bit of credit somewhere, right? I mean, the team is 14-2. They find ways to win. The Flores defense has just been astounding. I know I've said this before, Jeff, but imagine them doing the exact same thing with J.J. McCarthy at quarterback. My goodness, we would never hear the end of it.
No, it wouldn't be possible because he doesn't have the skill set,
right,
certainly as a rookie, that Darnold has. I mean, Darnold's been a journeyman, but holy crap. The over-under wins for the Vikings before the season started was 6.5.
Yeah.
I mean,
they far exceeded expectations and
exceeded expectations.
Yeah. So for that, they get to play Sunday night in the game 272 against the Detroit Lions, the marquee matchup. And this is an incredible game coming up on Sunday night, even that they're battling for the number 1 seed. The loser goes to the number 5 seed. But think about that. A 3-loss team is going to be the second best in the division. A 5-loss team is third best in the division. The way these teams have played, Green Bay has beaten everybody but Minnesota, Detroit, and Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Can you argue that Green Bay is the 4th best team in the NFC because of that?
But I mean, what Minnesota has done is been taking advantage of Sam Darnold's skill set combined with a really talented set of wide receivers. I mean, the assumption was you lose Kirk Cousins, you're going to lose a lot of that downfield ability. You're going to this guy who's never done anything, but that set of receivers just killed us because it didn't matter who was there. If it was Jefferson, if it was Naylor constantly, Addison, Hawkinson. How many plays did Hawkinson destroy us on where they just needed to get some yards? And then obviously you got Aaron Jones coming out of the backfield as well. They had so many different ways. They had 4 receivers who had 68 or more yards receiving in the game, 24 receptions among those 4 receivers. Well, how are you going to defend something like that, especially when you're missing a couple of your D-backs? This is something that's challenging. And as long as you've got that patient quarterback who's willing to wait for them to open up, this is going to be something that's difficult to defend. And certainly you look at Detroit, because of how many of those defenders that they've lost, this is going to be a real challenge for those Detroit Lions.
Well, but that's the key. If you get pressure on Darnold, certainly the Vikings offensive line has given up a lot of sacks, but Darnold doesn't get rattled. But then it was weird how our offensive line really did seem to get a little bit rattled. And we scored a touchdown. Vikings score a touchdown. So then we get the ball back. The stat line is 6 plays, -2 yards, 2 minutes and 29 seconds. I went back and I looked, I'm like, that's awful.
I went back and rewatched that entire drive because the third quarter was the key to the game, first of all. Let's start out with that. In that third quarter, there were 144 yards of offense for the Vikings to 33 yards of offense for the Packers. Now, we did have that short field that gave us a touchdown there, but 144 to 33. And specifically on that drive, go through the first 3 plays, look great, get a first down to Dobbs, and then we run to Wilson. We have the Zach Tom illegal formation. I mean, how many dumb penalties did we have on the offense? It gets to 2nd and 13, and then essentially they threw the blitz at us twice in a row, and we had Emmanuel Wilson once going out of the backfield, so it was 5 of our linemen against 5 defenders coming in, no help from the running back. And then on the sack, it was the exact same thing, that you had Emmanuel Wilson and the 5 linemen, and Emmanuel Wilson was overwhelmed. And this actually gets to a strategic thing that mattered a lot, right? We've talked about how Chris Brooks has been really good both in pass receptions and in pass blocking. Chris Brooks only had 8 plays on offense in that entire game. It's like we have this weapon that was more effective and we didn't use him. Other sacks that we had in the fourth quarter, all 3 of the sacks on Jordan Love were in the fourth quarter, right? We had Josh Jacobs serving as the pass blocker coming against these large linemen from Minnesota. And we essentially couldn't use Josh Jacobs at all in the second half other than his touchdown run. Josh Jacobs in the second half, 4 rushes for 8 yards in the entire second half. He was in on a lot of plays in the fourth quarter, 0 rushes in that fourth quarter. And so if you're not going to run with Jacobs and you're going to force him to do the pass blocking, I think these sacks and this pressure on Love is what is going to result in those situations.
The other thing that I noticed about Love, he seemed to be a lot more conservative with the ball just over the last couple of weeks as well. Now, he hasn't thrown an interception, which is good, but it seems like he's a little tentative at times. I mean, he's been throwing the ball away, which is great, we're also not seeing these splash plays or these really tight window throws. It's been a number of weeks since we've seen those. So there seems to be...
Or it's seen those consistently. I mean, we've seen some of them. It's not like he had a bad game. In fact, some of the numbers say he had a very good game overall. Yeah. It's that too often he's throwing it further away than it needs to be. You want to get it closer where the receiver is going to really be able to make a play, even if it's bringing more risk into the play, especially when you're down 3 scores.
Yeah, that fourth down in the red zone, that throw, that's another one where it's like, what the hell kind of play call is that? It's not a short yardage. It's, if he catches it, he might score a touchdown, but therein lies the rub. He's got to catch it. And like I said earlier on, the drops kind of came back in this game and just were cruel at really inopportune times. If you're hitting receivers in the hands, generally they should be catching it unless it's jarred loose, and it's not being jarred loose.
But that also helps Minnesota because it means that Jordan Love was throwing more to Romeo Doubs than he might have preferred to. There were 11 targets to Doubs in that game. Yeah. Third quarter, Jordan Love was 3 of 5 for 19 yards. All 3 receptions were to Romeo Doubs in that third quarter. Again, this consistency of sending the ball to the same people time after time again is a real problem. And it doesn't matter what quarter we were in, there were issues with that we had to deal with.
And no Watson meant no really stretching the field. Where was Reed, who's been very successful? And why, now that we've got both tight ends, why are we not seeing more tight ends catching the ball? I mean, Musgrave had 1 catch.
Or more 2 tight end sets to help our running game or our pass game. So they don't know what is coming based on the formation. It's like a 2 tight end set. We can go either way. And guess what? We're going to take you whatever way you give us.
Yeah. 1 target for Musgrave. I mean, he caught it 4 yards. Hooray.
And that was in the first quarter too.
Yeah. And I thought, okay, maybe they're, warming him up here. We're just kind of go back and forth because Kraft was only targeted 3 times as well.
And 2 of those were huge plays.
Yeah, so 4 targets to your 2 basically stud tight ends. I mean, come on. That seems like a play calling issue. Play to your strengths. That is a major strength of ours. Because anytime Tucker gets the ball in his hands, he's looking to run over a motherfucker. So get him the ball a lot. Have him run people over. That's what's going to energize not only him, but also energize the offense and probably the defense as well. That's what gets people fired up. And if I'm a defensive back, I want no part of Tucker Kraft coming down looking to run my ass over.
Well, he and Josh Jacobs both have that. They're running into guys' faces, and that is an aggressiveness that this team needs. So if they find it here in the postseason, that'll be perfect. Real quick silver lining, Packers versus Vikings. In the fourth quarter of the 2 games combined, the Packers outscored the Vikings 37-3. In the fourth quarter of the 2 games. So we know we can score against this Minnesota team. We just need to, as we alluded to earlier, start off faster, stronger, better, and take control of the game points-wise in the beginning.
I have a hot take type of question for you. Is it time for Matt LaFleur to give up play calling? Because he's clearly in charge of a lot of things, and he's getting into these consistent ruts. And does he need somebody else whose primary job is taking care of play calling so he can do the overall management of the team? So whoever is calling the plays is 100% focused on that one task only.
Yeah, but if I say yes to that, Neil, who is that person?
That's the problem. Adam Senovich is not the guy to be the play caller. And I think this is a weakness on the staff. You look at whether it's Adam Senovich or you look at Jason Vrabel, neither of those coaches is really in a position to do this. And that's a weakness in staff construction for Matt LaFleur.
So is this going to be something in perhaps the offseason that they might address? I mean, I don't think they'd go out and hire a new offensive coordinator. I mean, would it be more of a consulting role? It's a fantastic question because you're right. We know Matt LaFleur can call good plays and yes, and do all of those things on offense because he's been successful with it. But is there somebody that he can interact with, sort of like the Robert Saleh on defense, maybe? And, we're not sure how much influence he's having, but maybe. That's an intriguing question.
As long as it's not the guy who tells him when to throw the red flag for replay, I don't care who they find for that role.
A total non-starter. Yeah,
I think that's definitely an off-season question. I think that this is a team that has always been very good. I shouldn't say always, but when we say always, we mean the last 30 years, the modern era of this team. They are very good at self-assessment. Postseason self-assessment, readjustments, fixing things that aren't working and things like that. So we'll talk about that maybe more in the offseason as speculation comes about.
Yeah, but I mean, your analogy is, well, Andy Reid has never given up play calling, and Andy Reid's obviously won all of these Super Bowls, but a major criticism of Andy Reid for much of his career is essentially brain farts in play calling, forgetting how to run the ball in the playoffs, for example. Yeah. And you would argue if Andy Reid actually had a superstar play caller that whole time, he might have even more titles than he has. He obviously has done great with Patrick Mahomes, but he was a great coach long before he had Patrick Mahomes. And Bill Barnwell had a great article on ESPN today about what are the head coaching vacancies and who are the coaches that are looking to potentially be hired at the various places. And there are a lot of offensive and defensive coordinators that were being looked at, but certainly there was nobody that would even consider somebody on the Packers offensive side of the ball for a head coaching position, in contrast to these really efficient offenses like those that you have in Detroit. And I think we need somebody that's got a full-time dedication to making this offense as good as it possibly can be. We've got the star players that can do it, but we need to make sure that that is the focus of the play caller.
I think part of that is the epic failure of Hackett and Getsy once they got out of Green Bay, and that they just couldn't do the same thing. When you talk about LaFleur handling play calling and having so much going on and comparing him to Andy Reid, that's where that clock management comes in and the not calling the timeouts at the right time. You're right that there needs to be someone there that has his ear, but that person who has his ear has to have better judgment as well. Once again, that final score in Minnesota, 27-25, a team that we probably could see again here in the next couple of weeks when we get into January football. But it is the end of the season or near the end of the season. What does that mean? Pro Bowl selections. Packers having 3, what would effectively be the top tier or first team Pro Bowlers. Josh Jacobs on the offense, Xavier McKinney and Rashawn Gary on the defense. But it gets us to the point where we start talking about end of year accolades and things like that. There's a rookie on this team, Jeff, that is really starting to emerge.
Mr. Edgerton Cooper. He didn't really play in the beginning of the year. He was really sparingly, and boy, he's really come on. So in this Vikings game, there was a glimmer on the defense. He was good. 11 tackles, 8 of those were solo, and most importantly, 4 of those were tackles for loss.
Yeah.
I mean, he is flying around. He's coming from the middle of the field to the edge, making tackles. He really had some amazing running back tackle. He's just flying in there. This is exactly what we need. This is the guy who fits this. He's fast. He's not afraid to make tackles. And he's just been really good. And the more experience he gets under his belt, reading plays, what's going to happen when Quay Walker comes back? I think he's taken Quay Walker's job.
He looks like a slim Ray Lewis.
Ooh.
Jeff, what you are really saying is that we need an actual star on our defense. With Jair being injured, with Rashawn Gary not reaching the levels that we'd have expected of him, same with Kenny Clark, we need an actual star on our defense, and we've got that emergent star in Edgerton Cooper.
And it's super fun to watch him flying around. Oh, man. It's
You
fun.
know, coming out of the draft though too, and the free agency, and it was talked about how Green Bay was finding the right people for their positions. They're finding their role players. Xavier McKinney coming in at safety.
Huge.
The question was it going to be Javon Bullard or Evan Williams at that other safety position? And it really becomes Evan Williams. But Edgerrin Cooper was going to become that guy in the middle, and then Javon Bullard maybe helping in the slot in that kind of that tweener position as well. Now our cornerbacks are falling apart, so we need to find that position again. And just like we can't say it enough, what the hell's going on with this defensive line? I mean, this is a defensive line that when we looked at it at the start of the season, there's 8 players on that defensive line. We were saying, give me any 4 of those 8 at any given time, and I'm good. And now we're really worried about some of the spots there being a liability. But right in the middle of that field, boy, Edgerrin Cooper is looking really nice. That is a great second round pick.
Well, and to your point, John, too, so Bullard, he also had 11 tackles in the game. So, I mean, he is definitely making his presence felt. 9 of those were solo tackles. He's not having any issues tackling. And if we can get Evan Williams back on the field, I mean, so yeah, let's end this on a positive note. Again, the defense, there seems to be some young emerging stars that I think are going to need to step up, not only in the playoffs, but as we get into next year then as well.
And for these rookies, it's Bears week. They had one Bears week already this year, but it was in Chicago. But this one's a little bit different. It is Bears week in Green Bay. It is week 18. It's the regular season finale. It's going to be a chilly day in Green Bay. But this team needs to end on a high note, even if it's just to, as Neil said earlier, get the sour taste of the Minnesota game out of their mouths, maybe to kickstart them to get into the postseason. There is a chance with this game if Green Bay beats Chicago and the Dallas Cowboys beat the Washington Commanders, Green Bay does move back up into that number 6 seed. Either way, they're in the postseason. But this is going to be a game where I think you have to start off playing your healthy players and playing them like it's a slobber knocking game and play tough and get out there and beat the Bears.
They need to feel like they felt after the New Orleans game. Straight out,
Yeah.
That's how they need to feel. They need to have that confidence because the Vikings game, even though it ended up being close, I think everyone sort of recognizes the Vikings could have scored more points than they did in that game. It was really nowhere near as close as the final score would indicate in that game against the Vikings. And they need confidence going into the playoffs for them to be able to do anything in the playoffs. And it's going to be interesting to see this team. I think we're again looking at Matt LaFleur knows how to coach in December. Yes, I know it's January, but this end of the season, getting the players ready in the regular season to perform at their best in the playoffs. This is what Matt LaFleur has been good at in Green Bay.
Not only that, though, but the players that they've signed, Xavier McKinney and Josh Jacobs, they've come from losing teams. They're not losing players. They were on losing teams. And they've expressed to the media their excitement. They're so looking forward to playing in the postseason and helping to carry this team. Well, great, because we're going to need them.
Yeah.
We're going to need them. Now, obviously, Josh Jacobs can't hand the ball to himself, so he needs to be definitely included with the play calling. And McKinney, obviously he started out so well. He had all that string of interceptions. I mean, he's still solid back there, but I would like to see him get another interception, another splash play, really get him energized, whether, they have 4 or 5 turnovers against the Bears just to kind of get the juices flowing again. But once they get into the playoffs, and they've got to be so looking forward to this because this is exactly not only why they were brought over, but what they've been really looking forward to. And I hope they can make a great run.
More importantly than why they were brought over from their perspective, that's why they came to Green Bay, was because we've got the history that is in the playoffs. And I want to go back to Xavier McKinney because, yes, he has been quieter, but that's partly because of all of the injuries we've had in the defensive backfield that essentially he's had to do a lot more cover and a lot less free ranging than he was doing earlier in the season. And, it's not that his play has dropped off as the season's gone on. It's that he's been asked to do a lot more to hold this defense together because of all the Band-Aids that are in the defensive backfield.
And I think it's a move to Green Bay that makes both of those guys, Jacobs and McKinney, Pro Bowlers, and even in the running for all pro players this season as well. Taking a look at the game, though, let's not take too much away from the Chicago Bears. This is a team that started 4-2. And remember, when they were in their bye week in week 7, there was a good logjam in the NFC North where we, the three of us, even said there's a possibility that the 5, 6, and 7 seeds for the playoffs would be all NFC North teams. Since that moment, the Chicago Bears have lost 10 games. One of them, the Hail Mary against the Washington Commanders, gets it all started off. And then the fourth game in that series is the Green Bay game, and Green Bay wins by a fingertip in that one as well. So Chicago hasn't been getting blown out in that sense. They're still within games. They're still able to play. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle Packers week coming to Green Bay.
I mean, they've also lost a head coach in the process of this all as well. So
was that? Yeah.
I mean,
it's clear that it's offensive coordinator and then a head coach. Yeah,
it's clear that there's been dysfunction since the Bears organization made those decisions, and it's borne out by the overall DVOA numbers. The Packers, 4th overall, 4th offense, 5th defense, 12th in the special teams. Chicago, 25th overall in DVOA, 26th in offense DVOA, 25th in defense DVOA. They are 7th actually in the ASHAT DVOA. But this is a team that's obviously exactly positioned based on what their record is. It's not that they've been unlucky to get that 4-12 record. They've been a bad team.
In the statistic that matters, though, Neil, there's in these 10 losses, there's 3-point losses to the Vikings, the Lions, and the Seahawks, in addition to that 1-point loss to the Packers. So that 6-3 game against Seattle, that's one of those that's got to be just mind-boggling to Bears fans, that they had so many opportunities in that game. And your numbers, Neil, really just kind of rattled off why they couldn't put more than 3 points on the board.
I would call that game more damning to the Seahawks than praise of the Bears, but be that as it may.
Yes.
Yeah, we watched that, though. You watch that game, and it seemed like a JV team. They just seemed lost. Whether it was Caleb Williams out there just seemingly unaware, and certainly the coaching staff and the players, there's all this dysfunction. So obviously this is a huge game. There's streaks on the line here, and obviously, playoffs for the Packers. And yes, to get kind of the stink of defeat off, and to what better team, hopefully, than a really dysfunctional, craptastic Bears team. Now,
it should be the cure for what ails you, right? A home game against the Bears.
It better be.
On the other hand, the Bears have nothing to lose in this game as well. Right. Caleb Williams wants to establish himself as the Bears quarterback of the future. And he has had moments that have been very good. He's had a lot of rookie moments as well, but he's had his moments. And if you're Caleb Williams, you're somebody who's looking, where do I want to go in my career? You go back to a Lovie Smith, that the first thing you got to do is start beating the Packers. And this seems like a golden opportunity. This season is lost as a season, but I can have something that's happy leading into the off season. So I would not completely dismiss the Bears as far as their motivations in this game.
I like where you're headed with this, Neil. And I do hope that Caleb Williams does try to make a lot of plays in this game, because I want Xavier McKinney to get his 8th interception on the season. Possibly his 9th as well.
Why stop at 8, John? Come on.
Right, exactly. Let's get all 10 in 3-in-1 game would be great, right?
I would say that's the one thing that Caleb Williams has been good at. He's actually only thrown 6 interceptions on this season. On the other hand, he's thrown 120 more passes than Jordan Love and only has 73 more passing yards. He has 6 fewer touchdown passes. And oh, by the way, Love has been sacked 14 times. Caleb Williams has been sacked 67 times for 459 yards of sack yardage on the season. If our front four collectively cannot get to Caleb Williams in this game, that's a problem. They should be very excited about this game.
Or this is going to be their Achilles heel, because Caleb Williams, unlike Sam Darnold, can run the ball and will choose to run the ball. Now, is Caleb Williams, to make a name for himself, is he going to throw the ball 60 plus times in this? He just might, because I don't think they're going to try and use the running game. I think you're right. They're going to showcase him. This is the Bears Super Bowl. And you're right, on a completely lost season, if the Bears fans can say, yeah, but we beat the Packers, then, I mean, it's still a lost season, but that's sort of their silver lining. They can say, we beat the Packers, a playoff team. We humiliated them at home. And that's the one concern I have with this, is that if the Packers do either take them too lightly or only decide to play their starters for maybe half the game or something like that, a Bears win is going to do more to demoralize, I think, the Packers than certainly to energize, again, a lost season for the Bears. And we cannot have that.
And Neil, you something you said made me think of our Craig Nall episode. Jordan Love has only been sacked 14 times. Malik Willis has been sacked 5 times. That's 19 sacks given up on the season. And we should note that 19 sacks given up through the 16 games already. Jeff, I think you've got the book there. That's pretty close to top numbers, right?
It is. And a tribute not only to Jordan Love, but to the offensive line as well.
In contrast, the Jets season is made for some entertaining stat numbers as well, in that in the last game when Aaron Rodgers was sacked 4 times, he moved ahead of Tom Brady in the official record for the most times sacked. He's now at 568 versus 565. Now, there is a caveat to that because official stats' number only goes back to around 1980. People have looked at sacks from the 60s and 70s, and as it turns out, the most sacks of a quarterback was actually on Fran Tarkenton, 570. So Rodgers needs to be sacked 2 times to tie Fran Tarkenton, 3 to go ahead of Fran Tarkenton for the all-time most times sacked by an NFL quarterback.
Right, and that's always been the knock on Rodgers, is that he'd rather take the sack than throw a wild pass, get the interception. We always were thankful the interceptions were low, but you got to be a really good quarterback to get sacked 570 times, though, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Hey, Neil, it's a home game this week in the finale in the Bears week. You know what that means. It is tailgating time once again in Green Bay. It's going to be a chilly one. Tell your brother the forecast for Sunday. Kickoff temperature is expected to be right around 20 degrees, partly cloudy skies, wind chills in the 5 to 10 degree range, so single-digit wind chills. I know your brother was telling me that they've changed the formula for how they calculate wind chills. I don't care. It's going to be cold either way.
But 20 degrees by the same token is still not terrible as far as the temperature is concerned. That's about like what it was like in the game against Miami this year, which was unpleasant compared to the other 2 cold weather games we've had. But it's nothing like when you're getting into the low single digits and some of those miserable games.
It is January in Green Bay. I mean, this should surprise no one. So yeah, a balmy 20 degrees, I'm sure most people will take it.
It wasn't but 5 years ago when January football was special. Now January football is week 18.
Yeah.
So it is still a regular season game, but we do still have, one more January football game to play at a minimum, hopefully more than that. But tailgating, yes, the game has been announced as a noon kickoff on Sunday. That means the parking lots open at 8 a.m. The Lot 1 tailgate party will start promptly at 8:01 a.m. Actually, for some of us, it's probably about 7:55 a.m. because we're there in the spot anyway, hanging out and getting ready to go. It'll be a great day in Green Bay. It'll be a chilly one. Come by, try to warm up if you can. Otherwise, just say hi and go do what you need to do, but we will be there. Our friend Scott, we'll talk about this as well, has been nominated for the Packers Fan Hall of Fame, so we'll have some information out at tailgating as well. He has a QR code that he created that you can scan. It'll bring you right to the voting page on the Packer Fan Hall of Fame site, and you can vote for Scott. You can vote once per day through the month of January. We've been putting it out on our social media, but we are really pulling for our friend Scott Schwartz to be the Packers Fan Hall of Fame inductee this season.
It's appropriate that they are playing the Bears, because isn't that the voting mantra in Chicago? Vote early, vote often. And that's what we can do here. So I've voted twice already,
How many dead email accounts can you use to vote with, Jeff?
Don't tempt me.
John, I'm glad that you're going to be in Green Bay. I will unfortunately not be in Green Bay, but I will certainly be there in spirit and paying close attention to whatever social media you're able to get out, but certainly very happy for Scott and very excited that Scott has been nominated and is in the voting for Fan of the Year as the host with the most of the Lot 1 tailgate. He obviously is more than just one person. He's representing a whole group of people that have had a major impact on cheering at Lambeau Field for Packers games, and I'm really excited for Scott.
Yep, he's the guy who puts it all together for us. So, yeah, we're excited. And like I said, we'll get information out on social media. Well, as we look at the Bears game here, it is the final game of the season, you guys. I'm going to pull back my notes of our picks for this final game. Now, it's kind of interesting. Jeff and I looked at this game at one point and said this was going to be a throwaway game, that it would probably be non-starters, would be a non-consequential game, that it would be a loss. Neil, you picked it as a win. The other part of that, though, is, Neil, you had the Packers as 13-4 on the season. You're going to miss that by at least a game. Jeff and I had them at 12-5, so that means, Jeff, for us to get 12-5, we have to change our prediction for this game. Are you changing your prediction for Packers-Bears in Week 18?
Well, this game means something on a number of levels. It not only means a potential change in seeding, a higher seeding, which is what we're looking for. But it's to get the stink of the Vikings loss. Just exercise those demons, beat the Bears. And if they beat the Bears, they will continue to extend their historic winning streak over the Bears. It'll be 12 straight. So it was 10, and then with the fingertip block, it was 11. And I think we need 12. Let's just put the Bears out of their misery. Don't give them hope. The Packers are favored in this game. They've got to win this game just to save face, to exercise the demons, and just put the Bears in their place.
The Packers are the better team. The Packers have the most to actually play for in this game. The Packers have things going on after this week. They're not checked out for the season. This is when the season really begins in earnest. They know that. They've been in the playoffs. They were in the playoffs last year. And so other than those rookies and those free agents coming over, this is something where they know what's coming up next. And for those who are rookies or just came over as free agents, they're excited about what's coming next. And they want to go into those playoffs on a high. Matt LaFleur's record certainly says that he is going to have this team prepared. I think this is a Packers victory. Go Pack, go.
Neil, I'm going to concede my ability to win our other action that we have going on the season. So congratulations to Chris, because the Packers are going to win this game, Neil, in a cold weather. I said it before. I know you like this word, in a slobber knocking game. There's going to be a lot of snot flying around that field, and it's going to be a Packer victory on Sunday. Let's go, Pack, go. All right, if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit subscribe, leave a comment, find the GBC podcast at Green Bay Chat. That is all one word. We are on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Blue Sky, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. On Facebook, it's the GBC podcast, Green Bay Chat, and you can follow us on any and all of those social media platforms. And may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Good night.